Hi, I'm Divya.
Hi, I'm Kahran. And this is
Thinking
On Thinking. Welcome to Thinking on Thinking. This week we talked to Fran Dunaway. Fran is maybe best known for starting TomboyX, the innovative underwear, athletic wear, sleepwear, swimwear company that she founded with her wife almost 15 years ago. And now they have offerings for all types of bodies and all types of people. However, before Fran started TomboyX, she had a whole set of careers. And getting to talk to her today about the choices that led to success in those careers and the choices that led to her walking away from those careers. We love today's conversation and hope you enjoy it too. Okay, maybe can you give like a 2-minute intro, like how you came to be the person you are?
Well, my roots are in the Deep South, and my dad was drafted into the Vietnam War, during the Vietnam War, and ended up making a career out of it. So he was ended up being in for 21 years and retired as a lieutenant colonel. He was a helicopter pilot. And so really provided an opportunity for he and my mom to experience different things. So leave small, rural Alabama and Mississippi and go places they would have never gone. And then my dad, he would get us stationed in different parts of the country or the world. And so ended up landing in Missouri for 6th grade through actually grad school. I ended up in various parts of Missouri. At that point, my mother, she was taking home ec classes, being the good Southern woman. And when she met my dad, and she actually had a job. She was working they met at a pantyhose factory outside of Alabama, I believe. And so she is very independent and strong-willed. And so she had worked her way from a secretary at the time to a stockbroker. And so she had a career in Missouri and Kansas City, and she was like, oh, I'm not moving with you again. So go where you need to go, but we'll be here when you get back. And so when my dad got stationed in Iran, I actually lived with my aunt my senior year of high school in Kansas City. And then my mom was working all the time, and my brother asked to go to military school. So he went to military high school in Mexico, Missouri.
Oh, wow.
And so he was out of the house at that point as well.
He was 15 or something.
Exactly.
Wow.
Another thing my parents did, which I am always really appreciative of, is my dad was working at the Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And so different families, military families from around the world would come to go to this Command and General Staff College for a year. And so they needed local families to kind of meet them at the airport, help them get adjusted, help them find an apartment. So my parents always found families with kids. So my brother went to school with several kids that came from other countries, and we're still close to all of them. So it's kind of interesting.
So, and you were how old when you were like meeting these families that you were helping kind of get settled?
It was, it was all through my high school.
Okay, so you were in Missouri at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had, the first family was from Holland, and the second from Turkey, and then the last family was from Iran.
Wow. I'm like trying to imagine though, because like I remember myself in high school, and like I was definitely had not come to terms with like being queer, gay, right? Like, and being associated with people who were also not cool would have just been like, I don't know. I feel like I already was so stressed about feeling cool and like fitting in that like, that's really amazing to me that you were, I don't know. Did you worry about these things at that point? Or like, do you remember, were you a cool kid? Were you a rebel-y kid or?
I went through phases because moving to different places every year is really stressful especially if you're not going to a military school. At that point, I was 6th grade. I was just a very happy kid. Always had been, full of smiles. And so I had a real shell shock when I first got there, because first thing is that I befriended a little girl, a fellow 6th grader in my class, who I thought was just really smart. And she sat at the front of the classroom, Sandy, and she would raise her hand, and I always had great answers. And I thought, oh, isn't she smart? And turns out she was the, kind of born-again Christian side of things. And so wasn't the cool kid. And I quickly became associated kind of with her, and then realized that wasn't the place I wanted to be. And I started going to church with her and her family, and it didn't sit well with my mom. And so, she felt like they were kind of trying to lure me into this other way of being.
Yeah.
And so eventually I just kind of tossed all that.
Did you feel like it was like useful for you at that time?
Oh, no, I just really liked her. Yeah, it became pretty brutal. I had some really mean girls that would follow me around and really harass me. And so after that, I decided to become a cool kid and, start stealing cigarettes.
Oh, really? Was that like
eighth grade? Yeah.
Yeah, eighth grade, I feel like is when.
Yeah, exactly. So I became the first smoker and, borrow cigarettes, steal cigarettes wherever I could or, that kind of thing, and started smoking and drinking and all the bad things.
But you never felt like you were like a thief or something, like even when you were like stealing cigarettes?
No, I think I felt really bad whenever I would do that. And it was more a way to fit in. And in high school, my reputation became Fran never gets caught. And so that was definitely part of my identity. And, all the cheerleaders were my friends and I played sports. I was a MVP and
interesting.
And I was from the Deep South, and so we just do things a little bit differently. I shot my first shotgun when I was like 7 or 8, and so I learned how to drive when I was 12.
Interesting. Do you feel like if you contrast with like your wife, do you feel like the kind of things that she was doing at those ages, like what would be typical in a different part of the country?
Yeah, I think it was a number of things because I had a lot of independence because my mother had chosen to become a career. I was a latchkey kid. So I had a lot of freedom. I think I also just kind of did things my own way. And so I knew how to drive a car since I was 12. And so I would just borrow the car. My dad bought this. That was our farm years, right? And so we had a garden and my dad bought a 1953 Ford pickup and painted it fire engine red. And he would pick me up at school once in a while with this big Panama hat and cigar and 3 dogs in the back. And I'd hide down at the end of the block and be like, don't come and get me in that truck ever again.
Oh my gosh.
And my dad's got a tremendous sense of humor. He's just a really funny guy. And so he liked to harass me a little bit. It was the 70s, and so there was just a lot going on. There were a lot of freedoms that kids don't have today, for example. Mm. And so the only time I got in trouble for borrowing the car was when someone, like the neighbor, saw me driving the fire engine red truck down to the river, with 8 girls in the back. And I think I weighed about 85 pounds, and the seat wouldn't move forward. It was a push start. And so in order to do the clutch, it was on the column, but in order to pop the clutch, I had to stand straight up. So I had to have someone sitting next to me shifting when I pushed the clutch in.
Teamwork, real teamwork.
Exactly. And then we'd go down to the river and play. Yeah.
Oh, that's too great.
My parents were very ingenious in their, at that point, their neighbor complained. And so a week before my 15th birthday, I was 14. And so they called me in on my birthday. They grounded me for 2 weeks. And so a week into being grounded, they call me into the kitchen and they say, we have a contract here. We want you to say you will not borrow the car without permission and, driving without a license and all this stuff. So I willingly signed the contract. There were 2 envelopes. And then the second envelope they handed to me, I opened. It was tickets to Mississippi to my grandfather's house because the driving age in Mississippi at the time was 15. So they flew me to Mississippi so that I could get a driver's license and not have to deal with waiting till I was 16.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
Which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah. That's such a clever, that's really nice parenting, I feel like.
Yeah. It was, I think it was one of the wins for them. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you want to be at that age? Like, did you want to go to college? Was that definitely what you were doing, or were you?
I thought college was the thing you did. I didn't know that was a choice. So it was a certainty that I was going to go to college. My mom was a college dropout. My dad ended up getting his master's through the Army as an adult.
So how come it was such a certainty you were going to go then? Because neither of your parents did, right?
Oh, they loved it. Oh, they wanted you to go. Yeah, it was like, you're going to college. So I think at the time, for a long time, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I loved animals. And I thought I'd have 12 kids. because I loved kids.
Yeah. Then you stayed in Missouri. So you went to college, you stayed in Missouri.
Yep.
But as you kind of went through those years, did you start to feel like you settled as like, you were still like kind of the cool kid and like you were, I don't know, maybe contorting a little for that? Or did that like start to change as you got a little bit older?
I think that I was definitely dealing with my identity around my sexuality when I was a freshman in college. So when I came out, I kind of just partied a lot. And so I went to a smaller undergraduate school, and it was primarily an engineering school. My dad he got the command of a platoon in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which was down close to this smaller school that was a primarily engineering school. So it was predominantly men and boys. And it wasn't a great place for female students at the time. But regardless, my parents were an hour and a half away. I was living with them at first. It didn't go well. My mother and I didn't see eye to eye for many years and were pretty estranged for a number of years. And so that kind of came to a weird, ugly place. And I moved out and then moved into group living. It would look like a dorm, but it was really not part of the campus. And so, I don't know, somehow managed to get through college there. I ended up getting a industrial design and psychology with some marketing degree, which I ended up getting a Bachelor of Science because it was a mining school. So there wasn't a master's program in my department. So I got to kind of work with the teachers, the instructors, the doctors, and got a really good experience that way. So I got to publish on some studies and stuff like that, so that I wouldn't have had the opportunity.
How cool. And sorry, but you're saying in industrial design, psychology, and marketing was what you were studying?
Yeah. The studies that I was part of were more in the kind of psychology and industrial design stuff. And so that was pretty cool. And then when I was finished and was trying to decide whether I wanted to go into business or whether I wanted to do something with more purpose.
Yeah.
And something that was more my values. So I ended up working at a group home, not even a group home, it was an institution. At the time, they were called retarded. Today, we fortunately call it developmentally disabled. But anyway, it was a rather large institution, and it terrified me.
Yeah.
It was one of the most frightening things I'd ever done. And so after a year of doing that, I decided to get my Master's of Education and not my MBA.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, you felt like you kind of had studied these things, but the thing that you most interested you was the psychology aspect. And then you kind of went to pursue that?
Correct. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Were they children or adults at the institute?
There were children. The first group that I worked with were children. So my master's program was 2 years long, and I ended up managing a group home for those 2 years that were adult males.
Wow. Do you feel like you thought of yourself as like a caregiver? Did that start to feel like this is part of who I am at that point, or?
No, in fact, just the opposite. Being a latchkey kid, it was kind of dog eat dog, fend for yourself a little bit and making things happen and not coming from a very nurturing environment. That wasn't something. And in fact, I think that's why I kept going back, is because I realized pretty quickly that I had more to learn than I had to teach.
Oh, wow.
And so I really owe that to one particular person who happened to be working on the day that I started. And she was phenomenal. I ended up with her for 10 years, but she was just really a phenomenal human. And the way she worked with these people was unparalleled. There was no one like it. And so I thought, well, if I can get to almost like her, maybe I could learn more about myself and become a different person. And in fact, when we were running the group home, so I took her with me to the group home, obviously. And one of the things we would look for when we were hiring people was not people that wanted to come in and help these poor children, but were more of I'm sure I have something to learn. And so that was pretty important. And in fact, when she and I moved to Washington together, and we opened the first medically fragile group homes for children in Washington State.
Wow. So was that the first time you feel like you had like a hero or like someone that you looked up to, or as like just like a person that inspired you? Is that?
Oh, That's a really good question. I wouldn't say it's the first time, but wow, she was a really huge part of my life. I've often credited her with really teaching me how to love.
Oh.
And it's funny because she came through a couple of months ago and was here at the house. And it was really interesting to kind of go back and think about and talk about how we saw each other at the time. And so, yeah, she was really remarkable and had no fear and just was so kind and caring and giving to these kids and adults that it still impacts me to this day. I mean, just the way she would do it, because I can guarantee you I saw a lot of horrible things.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And a lot of people that were not good, kind, loving people. And so that was a big deal for me and just really taught me how to love.
Yeah. Because it's interesting because you already at that point, it sounds like you started the group home. Is that fair? So you were already kind of doing entrepreneurial.
When I was working on my master's, there were group homes as part of this institution, so on the campus. And so I got promoted from where I was working with kind of more general population, and they moved me up to this. It was a big campus, and so we had our own house. But I didn't open that one. But when Kathy and I moved to Washington, my first job was to open the first medically fragile group home in Washington State. And that one was very entrepreneurial. In fact, after we opened the first one, I realized quickly that I didn't want to run them. I just wanted to keep opening them. And so we opened up a few more over the next few years. And look, I was 25 years old. So, this was a whole different thing. And so I liked getting them up and running and getting good marks from the inspectors and then doing it again and again. And so ended up by the 4.5, 5 years later, I was the executive director for the whole agency and had 60 clients and 40 employees. And I was 31. And that's when I sold everything and went to film school.
Wow. So at that point, that's an agency that you and her had started.
We ended up working for an agency. It was Cascade Christian Services. She didn't work there at first because she had just finished her Bachelor of Fine Arts and she was going to be an artist. And we moved to Bellingham, Washington, thinking we could find jobs. But turns out people with PhDs were bagging groceries there because it's really about the place to live. And so we were getting to a place where we really needed jobs. And I saw this ad for Cascade Christian Services, and they were opening the first group home of this sort in a different town. And so I had a lot of autonomy, but I did work for the agency.
Wow. And you just went and talked to them and you were like, hey, you're opening one in this other town. I can help you open one in this town?
They were looking for someone to open it in the other town, and they had been in trouble with the state. And this is a very conservative Christian community up in Linden, Washington.
Yeah.
And so they were going to lose their license. So at the table was a woman from the state. And she, I'm pretty sure, made sure that they hired me, despite the fact that I didn't show up in a dress. I didn't have any friends that had cross necklaces I could wear. But I did show up with a lot of experience and enthusiasm for the population and for the project. And so they hired me, and then I would commute to this other town.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And this is you're 25 years old and you've had one job.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just inspired a lot of confidence in people, like even then.
I must have.
Yeah.
I felt like I had the experience. So yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, it sounds like you felt confident about, what you brought to the table, and that's amazing. Do you feel like that came out of your childhood and kind of moving around a lot, that you kind of you were like, I know how to do this thing?
Yeah, I think that certainly being an Army brat, I can talk to anyone.
Yeah.
And that's just continues to this day. And really, I just really like people and stories and hearing about what people have done with their lives. And so that was always easy. And even I do remember I studied, I rehearsed, and I was very nervous about going into a Christian agency. And it wasn't that I was overtly out, but I wasn't going to fake it. And so I'm pretty sure it was.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, obviously, you were out to yourself and to your community.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember the outfit I wore to the interview. It was pink, And it had a vest as part of it, as the ensemble.
Amazing.
And I remember the woman and really connecting with the woman from the States. She was a badass. And I felt like she was pretty clear that she knew who I was. And so I wasn't sure, are these people gonna hire a lesbian? And and then a few years later, when they promoted me to executive director, that caused quite the stir, because not only did they hire me, but within 8 or 9 months, I convinced them. And I was like, I won't interview her. I want you guys to interview her, because we needed a program manager. I was good at the logistics and setting up the, running of the houses and hiring people, but she was great with the kids or the clients, right?
Yeah.
And so they ended up hiring her. So the two of us ran the group home together, openly out to this community.
Wow.
Even though it was never spoken about. And then
and this is the 80s, right? Mid 80s?
Yeah, mid 80s. Mid at this point, probably 88, 89, 90s. Yeah. And so they hired her, and then a few years later fired the executive director and promoted me. But what I felt was interesting, and it was because he was doing a lot of really bad things, paying his wife full time, for example, and she didn't work there. So it's just little subtle things and not doing a good service to the people in his community.
Yeah.
And so they, and that was up in Linden, Washington. So I moved into his big office. It was, oh my gosh, it was insane. And
they provided a house to you?
No, it was an office, but we were still, I was still commuting because that was still outside of my purview. But there was this wonderful human being who is still there. I looked him up a few years ago. I'm sure he's still there. I won't say his name other than George. And he was very much in the community and had worked with the former executive director for years. And I felt like he was the person that should have been promoted.
Oh,
but
I see.
The former executive director had kept him so in the dark about things for obvious reasons that George wasn't prepared. So my commitment to the board was, let me come on for a year, work with him, get him into this seat, because he's part of your community. I'm not, and I'm never going to be. And so let me put him next to me and bring him along. And that's what we did. And he still runs the agency.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
That is amazing. I'm also just amazed at like your ability to do that, right? Like, especially at that age, or even any age, a lot of people feel insecure about giving away power, especially once they have it, and to feel like, you weren't chasing more money, you weren't chasing more power, you were kind of happy to say, I can add value here, and then there'll be a point that someone else will add more value than me.
And it was his place. It wasn't my place. I think it just felt right. That's all.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's almost like more of a moral thing for you, that it was like, this is the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How interesting. Do you feel like it's a lot of times it comes to that, like with these kinds of questions in your mind, they feel like there's moral questions?
I think it's just, a matter of right or wrong. The right thing was that he was there. He'd been working there forever. This guy kept him in the dark. And this guy was not a good person, but it was also, how long was I going to last in that community? And trust me, I mean, I had a guy circling the building in his car.
Yeah.
And then he went to all the neighbors and told them there was a lesbian running the agency now. And all of the parents of the people living there came to see me. But what they came to see was, or what they saw when they came. So this guy that ran the agency had this big, ridiculous office, like, he needed this huge space. And he has this big manly desk, right? And behind the door, when you walked into his office, was this metal box, and it was keys. In every closet, this was a group home that had 2 long arms of rooms.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 long arms of rooms, and then a shared kitchen living room. The kitchen had these little garage door windows that came down and locked.
Okay.
All of the closets in the hallway locked. He had keys to everything locked. And I thought, what on earth? This is where these people live. They're Down syndrome, highly functioning. Some of them, they were, it was just a dark place.
Wow.
First, day one, I unlocked everything and had those garage doors removed out off of their kitchen.
Wow.
And so these families would come in and they'd be like, this is amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so what could they do but, be there and support? And in fact, I helped move like 4 of them. They built some apartments in the back. And then they were independently living.
Wow.
There was one Down syndrome the woman whose name was Frances. And oh my God, she just loved me. And so it was, to me, there was another really important thing that happened that was just fortuitous. And that was, there was this amazing woman that got in charge of the Department of Developmental Disabilities for the state of Washington. And so their edict for us was that they handed down these values. And these values were something we were supposed to bake into how we ran the show, which to me was great because I'm working for a Christian organization that has lots of money, right?
Yeah.
And so I could point back to the values and basically get anything I wanted. Like I got 401k for the employees, values, and then because if we're supposed to treat the clients, if we need to help them feel a sense of value and a sense of status, then we need to make sure that these employees are feeling that too, because you can't expect employees who aren't feeling valued or status or that to trickle down. So you have to get them to a better place. So I got the highest pay, and there was a 200% turnover rate in the industry at the time. 5 years later, I still had 80% of our staff.
Wow.
And so that was something that I was able to leverage, if you will, with the board was, you're going to have to kick a little bit of money in. And of course, I would go down and lobby at the state capitol when it was time to talk to people. I remember Gary Locke was a representative at the time, and he had a son or nephew that was Down syndrome. So you just, you figure out who's got who you're going to connect with to get your kind of agenda pushed forward.
Wow. How did you were you talking with someone about like, oh, I need a strategy right now to like do this thing? Or were you kind of just like figuring it out? Like, how did you think of going to lobby and like?
There was an organization for sure. There was an organization of other group homes, and we would get together in meetings. Yeah. You
didn't start this organization. It already existed.
No.
I see.
No.
Interesting. But so for 6 years, you were kind of committing there, and then there was 1 year that you were the executive director.
Yes.
And then you transitioned it over to.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, you were willing to commit a lot of time to that community. So.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I was just challenging your assertion slightly when you were saying that, like, were you really going to commit to that community and do a good job as an executive director? I mean, you did commit to that community. You spent a lot of time and energy there.
Yes,
Yeah.
But not my life. Yeah, and I think I was there a total 5 years total.
Okay.
And after we opened the first group home, then we opened a second one and up in north of Bellingham.
Yeah.
And then got to kind of handpick the kids for that one. So yeah, we ended up with a total of 3 group homes that I opened in the years before I became executive director.
Wow. But like, what happened? How did you decide that you wanted to go to film school? Like, was that already in the cards or?
No. My dad gave me a little Brownie camera when I was 6, and I still have it. And it was one of those you look down in to take a picture. And so I just fell in love with photography at the time, and I would just always had a camera in my hand. And so I was dealing with a lot of red tape there was a lot of bureaucracy with group homes for kids and getting the right kind of equipment and the right kind of stuff. And I just felt like it just wasn't right. There was just something that was broken within the system, and it just wasn't enjoying it. I enjoyed the work, but I didn't enjoy the struggles. And so I remember Kathy and I were flying back from a vacation in Hawaii, and I just looked at her and I said, I'm done. I want to sell everything and go to film school. And I thought film school because it was I like storytelling, I like writing, and then I also like photography. So I thought that was a good match. And she was an artist, and so she thought, well, I'll go up there and work, see if I can get a job in an art department or something. And so we sold our house, we sold one of our cars, and we went to Vancouver, BC. And I chose there because A, it was closer, and B, it was an immersive 1 year long program. I thought at my age, in my early 30s, I was not the oldest, but I was almost the oldest. That it would just be a good thing to go all the way through. And the other thing was, of the 25 students, they had 25 students every quarter, I think, and you would just go through with the same group. And of the 25, 24 wanted to be directors. I wanted to be a producer. And so...
can you just define it for our people?
Sure. Well, directors are ones much more involved with the on-set, working with the actors, getting them to do the performance you want, kind of setting everything that's going on. And then the producer is kind of the one who helps bring in the money for it and helps kind of everything run on time and frees up the director to stay focused kind of what's on the lens, whereas the producer takes care of everything that's happening around the lens.
Interesting.
And that's in film, not on television. In television, the producer is a producer/director.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Is it fair to say that a director is more focused on the day-to-day and the producer is more thinking about a little bit longer term, or that's not quite right?
I think the director, at least in film, is much more in the creative.
Okay.
So anything non-creative, they shouldn't be bothered with because they're trying to just stay focused on the performance, how it looks, how it feels, what the camera's doing.
Got it.
And that kind of thing.
Got it.
Yeah. And it was also really appealing to me because I realized from the group homework that I'm much more inclined. I have to have a job that is purpose-driven. And then the second thing is that I like a beginning and an end. I'm not a person that can do one thing for a very long. A dear friend who's worked for 33 years at Starbucks. And there's no bone in my body that could ever have done that. And so to recognize that early on, I feel like it was good to know that a beginning and end, that's where I thought, oh, film.
Amazing.
And then I'm done.
And I'm just, again, like amazed at your wherewithal. I need a better word for it. But you kind of had built like, a position of respect, right? Like you were executive director of this group, right? You had multiple group homes. And then you were like, no, I'm willing to go and like kind of be a student again. Mm-hmm. And then also with the idea that you were going to be a producer of films. Like, isn't that hard to break into?
Oh, yeah. In fact, it's really hard. And I'll never forget. So I was working at the group homes, but then I was doing one shift a week at a psych unit in a hospital in Bellingham. And I hadn't been there for very long. I think under 6 months when I made this decision. And so I remember going into the boss there and saying, I'm sorry, I'm moving on. She said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to film school. And she was like, oh, you should not do that. That's just too hard to break into. You'll never be successful. And really just like tried to talk me out of it. And I thought, no, I'm not, it was just not good.
Wow. So you never kind of felt like, was there certain people's opinions you kind of cared about, or Kathy?
Kathy, for sure. Yeah. For us to do it together. Yeah.
Also, sorry, just to rewind for 1 second.
Yeah.
So you have a conversation on an airplane and then that's it?
Yeah.
Like you guys literally decided in a 5-hour flight between Hawaii and Seattle.
Yeah. We did it. Yeah.
Do you feel like there was disagreement, or like you just were able to calmly say, I want to change our lives completely, and someone was able to calmly hear that and respond in kind?
I just remember, no, I had left the Cascade Christian agency and had started my own with Kathy. That's right. We had started a separate agency. Well, we had kind of merged with another agency, so it wasn't our own. And we had been doing that for a year. And that's when we decided that, because the struggle was harder without that funding that we could readily access.
Yeah.
And so it was just, a lot more having to deal with caseworkers and whatnot. So, yeah, so we were doing that. We weren't working for the Christian agency at that point. And so, yeah, I think we were just ready.
That makes sense. Out of curiosity, was it that kind of asking people for money that was bothering to you at that point? Or was it more the like bureaucracy of like...
I feel like, and it'd be interesting to see what Kathy's perspective would be on this, but I feel like for me, there was one particular young man who came to us and he needed a particular type of equipment. And because when they brought him to us, he was 6 and he was from Laos. And he was so over medicated, getting a tremendous amount of Valium to control his seizures. He kind of seizured all the time. He had no control over any of his faculties. He was nonverbal, obviously. But Kathy was able to, she rigged him up this contraption. She got a guy to put a board together and we kind of strapped Cy on there. And so his hands were free. He was upright and then put a buzzer. She put a buzzer, 2 buzzers down, and she would say, do you want water? Do you want juice? And he would like spend like 3 minutes. And then finally he would hit one. And we realized that there was something going on.
Yeah.
There was more going on inside there than anyone could. First thing we did was get him off of all the Valium, obviously. And so then we went back to the caseworker and said, we found this wonderful piece of equipment that could really help him. He's got more going on in there. And they ended up transferring him to California so that they wouldn't have to pay for the equipment. And he died 6 months later.
Oh, wow.
And so that was like, okay, let's do something different.
Yeah. Wow.
Or I remember another story where we had a guy who was from China and had grown up in kind of a village and could just run free. No shoes, no clothes. And he was just kind of that. And then his family moves here, very poor family. And they lived in apartments down in the Soto area. And he had gone home for Christmas and it kind of destroyed their home. And so we had to go pick him up and take him back to the group home on Christmas Day and kind of spend it. So it was just a lot.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously it makes sense how you may like have been considering other kind of careers, but like film just was what made sense and appealed to you.
Yep.
And then you felt you're going to break in as a producer. And then what happened? Is it like, did you film school live up to your reputations? And then did you try and be a producer? Did you try and be anything else?
Yeah. Initially, my interest was really in documentaries. And then I realized that I probably wasn't going to make a lot of money at the time, that documentaries were not, we didn't have the Netflix and all that that we do today.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that happened is that Kathy and I broke up. And so that kind of changed my whole world. My world kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
And
in Vancouver while you were in school.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Right at the very end. Right. I was working, I was going to school at 7 in the morning and getting home at 10, 11 at night.
Oh, wow.
And so...
And then you had homework also?
Oh, well, usually the homework was typically in the edit suite, right? So it was sound editing or editing. And it was the year before they went digital.
Oh, wow.
So I was editing sound on a Steenbeck flatbed with the tape. And so you had to splice it and tape it. And so...
wow.
Yeah. And so I was gone.
You deeply understand the process.
Exactly, which really paid off. So then when I did start producing, I knew all of the jobs because I did audio, I did, editing, I directed, I wrote scripts. So I knew all of the pieces. So I ended up kind of taking a diversion and then coming back. But by the time I got back to Washington, I was doing gig economy. I gave myself a year to not get paid. And so I worked on a number of, or a handful of independent feature films, shorts as well as narrative or long form. And so did various jobs.
How were you getting yourself known? Like, me and like, I've now been in this journey for a little while, right? My partner at the V has been doing it for a lot longer. Right? Like establishing yourself as a freelancer takes some time.
It does. How
did you do it immediately?
Well, I had a friend, my best friend in film school was this guy named Jay, and he's from Seattle. And so he knew some people that were already connected within the community in Seattle. And I knew I didn't want to move to LA. That just didn't feel like a right fit for me. So he and I were pretty much attached to the hip for a couple of years. And also I got a job working with down in Olympia for the government. They had a television department. And so they would do like closed caption TV and then they would do videos for various, I remember I produced a Y2K project because, all the computers were going to crash and we were going to die. And
you come out of a breakup of 10 years with this person you're deeply in love with, and then you manage to like score government contracts, establish yourself in a community as a filmmaker where you've never been before.
It took a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I took a year off.
Were you like a hustler? Is that how you thought of yourself? Or like...
Oh, yeah, I could be persistent. I remember one of my first gigs. I was actually living in Michigan. So after film school, I went to Michigan for a year and helped raise some kids. And I moved them back, or they moved, and I moved with them back to Washington. But there was a woman there that had her own production company, and she was also a lesbian, and she was just like intense, one of the most intense people you'll ever meet. And I went and did like an informational interview. So how did you get into the business? And she had a full-on production company. It was Michigan, so she did car commercials and all sorts of big things and pretty well established. But she just didn't get along well with people and she was a little bit crazy. And she used to have a full staff. And she said, yeah, one day I just walked in and fired them all. And so she'd been working by herself for a long time. And so I ended up driving back to my parents' house for 4th of July. And I decided I would just stop in every weird little town and send this woman a postcard. And I would say things like, who brought your coffee to you today? Or so did you have to go through all those rough cuts yourself, or would you like some help? And so finally, after like the 10th card, she called the house and was like, okay, I give up. She could come and work for me.
Wow.
And so I got to work for her. I learned how to edit on a it was the big thing at the time. I was going to say an Ari, but that wasn't it. Anyway, so by the time I got to Missouri, I had some other experience under my belt, and Jay was in Missouri. So then he and I got together, and one of his good friends did all of the multimedia for the Wink Luke Asian Museum.
Okay.
And so John Jay and I became the trio. We could do anything, any kind of short form videos or other stuff. And then Jay was able to raise some money, and he produced a couple of short films and a feature film. And I was the first assistant director on those and the producer. So, yeah.
Wow. So
yeah.
When you say between the three of you guys could do anything, that means like you would come out, you could film it, you would edit it, you would produce it, like you would get it from start to finish. You guys could do anything.
Yeah, I ended up buying a condo in Capitol Hill in the building where John had his studio. And so John had an editing suite, and he had all the camera gear, all the sound gear, all of the stuff. And the three of us just kind of hung out a shingle, and we would pick up gigs here and there. And I would also pick up gigs. I ended up out at Microsoft Studios. I would do stuff. I would do the annual Halo gaming stuff. And then at first it was seasonally. I was helping this guy produce political ads. Then he had just moved to Washington. I was on the first steering committee for the Human Rights Campaign here in Seattle.
Yeah.
And so started the Human Rights Campaign and was the dinner co-chair for 3 years. And one of the guys, a straight guy had just moved here from DC, and he was opening a West Coast office for an agency that did political ads for Democrats nationwide. And he hired me to produce some ads the first season. And then the next season, he hired me for a little bit more. And it turned, and then finally, I think, I don't know, maybe 5 years in, he offered me a full-time job. And then a few years later, he and I split off and formed our own agency. And we were partners in the media strategies firm. And then I took this other turn. So
wow. So you basically became an independent contractor again, right? Like you weren't managing people at any point. So you went from having this like large team to then, just kind of creating content by yourself. Did you think about yourself differently? Like being like a manager wasn't so much part of your identity. It was.
Oh, I came out of the womb bossy. There's no question about that. And I've never had trouble delegating. Well, that's I think what I liked about producing is because then I was in charge of the whole crew,
The whole project. Yeah, I see.
and so it wasn't. I mean, yeah, Jay and John and I could go and do small projects together, but when we did the independent feature film, I mean, we probably had a crew of 50.
Yeah.
And so, and then I was a producer as well as the assistant director, so I literally was bossing everybody around on set all day.
Yeah.
And so, and it really came pretty naturally to me, all in all.
And do you feel like when you introduced yourself, like, what would you say? Were you a filmmaker first, or did you ever introduce yourself as like a queer woman or as a lesbian? I don't know. Or is that just never an introduction point?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, I'm probably a producer at that time, even though I also did audio and I could shoot. Camera was always my first love. I didn't have the confidence in that department, but I also didn't want to be one of the workers. I wanted to be in charge of the workers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you also felt like, did you feel like you were trying to like be a more outspoken queer person when you were kind of becoming like dinner co-chair and becoming, or was that not part of the?
Yeah. I think that I remember when I first walked into an HRC office, which I had never heard of the organization.
Yeah.
And so that would have been, it was after film school. And I walked in and I was like, what's this human rights campaign? And it was just a little bitty storefront kind of thing. And I walked in and I was like, oh my gosh, they're getting involved in politics to change things, to really make a difference. And I got to say, ever since I heard Urvashi Vaid speak, I watched her on CNN, and that was way before film school. And I think it was 1990 when we did the March on Washington.
Yeah.
And she took if you haven't seen that speech.
I don't know if I have.
Oh, she was so smart. I had instant in love with this woman. She spoke with eloquence and just so smart. And I just got this. It was like an aha moment of, the real change is in Washington. And that's how. And so that was always in the back of my mind. Like, because when I came out, I was never, I was more appalled that people would think that was wrong when I was like, oh, this is right. This is who I am.
You never felt like, I felt that way for so long, right? That I felt like there was something wrong with me. But you never kind of internalized those? I
did, and it kept me from coming out to myself. And I only saw that in retrospect.
Huh. But you came out to yourself when you were like 16, right? It sounds like.
No, I didn't allow myself to feel those feelings until I was 21.
Okay.
And so I was really struggling that was not going to pop. I was having dreams in high school, but that was something that was not going to happen. And so when it did, then I was like, and it was an epiphany. It was like all these doors open and everything started to make sense of my whole life, where it was like, it's because I'm not into that. And just made a lot of sense of why I struggled.
Wow. But you don't feel like you had like years of, I don't know. I feel like it took me a long time.
They weren't okay with who I was. And then that was painful, but I wanted to prove them wrong, and I wanted to create change within our government so that we weren't treated as bad, I guess.
So do you feel like you were like being motivated by like, I can do more? Like you were this kind of this growing sense of like, at first you affected change at like one home level, and then you kind of was like, then it was all these children, and now it was like, I'm gonna move policy. Or was it just not really so much like that? It just worked out that way?
I think it was more like, I'm interested in this and I want to get involved in creating change. I've always wanted to make things better and have a purpose. And look, with the Human Rights Campaign, that was a 20-hour-a-week volunteer job.
Wow.
And it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. It put to good use a lot of skills that I had in terms of organizing and growing a business, or not a business, but an organization. And I remember I set a goal to double our revenue for every dinner.
Yeah.
And kind of butted heads with one of the people that had been involved in the He was a board of director, and he thought that there was no way I could do it. And so it was profoundly satisfying when he came to me afterward and said he was wrong. And he shouldn't have doubted me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Do you feel like you had ever questions in your mind of like, I do things like this, or like, these are not things I do, or just those were never kind of like you weren't like, oh, I'm a businesswoman, right? So I don't get involved in like policy, or like, I'm a documentary filmmaker, right? So they're like, this is the kinds of things I do. Like, I'm just curious, was that like kind of like even a way that's ever entered your mind, or is it kind of just a very foreign model to you?
Yeah, I don't think it was anything like that. In fact, I know that through the years, one of the challenges I've had to do is not be so literal.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I miss things because I'm being very literal. And then the other thing I have to do is give myself permission sometimes. But for example, sometimes I can look back on the way I would think something was done, and then somebody points out a different way. And it's just like this clear aha moment where I can't even believe that I didn't figure that out, because I'm following a steadfast, like, tick, 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 and not giving myself permission to veer.
Yeah. It's like it's almost like someone cheated, right? It's like, you thought the game had to be played in a certain way, and then someone shows you there was a different way to play the game. And then it's like, well, what the hell?
Totally.
But it sounds like you kind of didn't have that reaction, though. You kind of would be like, oh, that's amazing. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. But I wish that I could figure out how to work around sometimes. I mean, I think I do that in some cases, but there are other times where it's like, how did I miss that?
Yeah. Interesting. And then what percentage of your time was spent in like lobbying versus like making movies at that point? Hello, Silky.
Well, I was gig economy. So when I had a gig, I was all in on the gig.
Yeah.
And then in between, I could do this other stuff, the lobbying stuff or the dinner stuff.
Wow.
And it was a lot of the same skills. The 3 dinners brought to the dinners were Lily Tomlin, Howard Dean, and John Waters. So it was a pretty big production.
Like how you would just like call people up or say like, I want to be able to talk to this person, and then invite them?
I think we would pick who our ideal top 3 were. And then I think that happened on a national level.
I see.
As I recall.
Wow.
But I did get to, like take Lily to her room.
Okay, I feel like we should do a part 2 with your last third of your life, like at a different point. Because yes. I feel like this is, this has been really lovely. This has been amazing. Franny, I had no idea.
Well, thank you. I'm old.
Oh. Well, no, but I think it's also so cool that like you really have never like clung to an identity. And it's just really interesting to me because I feel like I'm so surrounded by people who are like so defined by, like something Divya and I talk a lot about is like if you went to kind of the top schools, whatnot, right? Like that's such a big part of your identity, right? Like, oh, I went to IIT, I went to Harvard or something. And then it kind of shapes what you think of as what you think can be available to you. Like, oh, I should be doing something that's of sufficient prestige because my family had sacrificed all these things for me to get to be where I am. It's just kind of interesting, right? Like as you talked about all these kind of different choices you made, it almost seems like those kinds of like fears or worry, like they just didn't enter your calculus as much. Or if they did, they were in a way that were subordinate to like, you wanted to do this thing. And it was like what you needed to do it. You were going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And just talk to people, it sounds like. I feel like the biggest thing I've heard you is you just talk to everyone.
Exactly. Don't know how to do it? Yeah, find someone to... I also think it's not putting people on too much of a pedestal or a deference in a way that it's like people are approachable. They've just got their own stories. They have their own journeys. They have their own paths.
Yeah.
And we all get there. I think that, I probably get the tenacity from my mother. And, she's just kind of very dogged in her approach to life. And so that's part of it. I mean, to go from, being a secretary and to a stockbroker, I mean, that's a pretty big deal for someone from Shady Grove, Mississippi. So I do, I'm grateful for that tenacity. That's not always a positive trait, I can guarantee you.
Yeah, but I mean, tenacity is also like resilience, right? And I feel like that's, I don't know, like
that podcast I was telling you about a little while ago, like they were talking about how usually that's what parents want for their children, most of all, is to help them like grow up with resilience, right? So, yeah, you know.
I look forward to listening to that one too.
Okay, cool.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thinking on Thinking. Our theme music and our audio engineering is done by Akshay from BTRPT Music.
If you found this topic to be interesting or have other topics you wish we would explore on a future episode, please reach out to us at our website, joyous.studio.